Hello, welcome to this first podcast on the UFOcast feed in quite a while. As you will see from the title, it is Doctor Who themed. So if you're not a fan of that, come back when there's more Jerry Anderson content. When we recorded this, we thought it was going to be all done and dusted in one recording. And as we went on, it quickly became apparent that we were going to run out of time, as you will hear. So this has ended up being part one of two. And I don't think there's anything more for me to say at this point, because we explain everything else in the recording. Enjoy. Hello and welcome to this episode of what I'm going to call the UFOcast Does Doctor Who. And I am Luke.
And I am Michael.
And we have a special guest who is called...
Tony.
Fantastic. And I'll come to you in a minute, Tony. The listeners know both me and Michael from our previous UFO exploits. But we are here to talk about Doctor Who tonight. Don't worry, I do have a Jerry Anderson related project in the pipeline, which I will be announcing relatively soon. And Michael and Tony can update you on what it is they're doing and where you can find them online shortly. But we are here because Doctor Who magazine recently ran a World Cup of the First Doctor on Twitter. And I was particularly annoyed at some of the choices that people made. Mainly because
there is a surprise.
Yeah, I'm a bit of a contrarian when it comes to some things. And also, there are certain stories that I felt were being overlooked. So I thought, let's convene a round table. There was supposed to be a fourth person, but that's gone a bit awry. So it's me and Michael and Tony this evening. So what we've done is...
I am convinced that, though, if we keep doing the other Doctors, we will have more of us.
Yes, I think we should.
And argue even more.
We can argue even more. So what I've basically done is I've replicated the group structure that Doctor Who magazine came up with. We have each rated the stories in each group from 4 down to 1. I've collated that into a table. These guys don't know who's got through the group stage yet. But we thought we'd use this as a jumping off point to decide what is the best First Doctor story of all time. So, without further ado, Michael, remind the listeners who you are, what else you do in the land of podcasting.
Right, okay. What do? I witter on by myself for hours, usually about Big Finish, always about Doctor Who on TV, and the Tin Dog podcast's been going for about 400 years. I'm almost at episode 1000.
Wow.
Which is just ridiculous. Let me see, I've also written the Whostrology book, the book Geek Myths, which you can get on Amazon, marvellous. And I've just published my first kids' book, which is book 1 in the Jane of the Air quartet, which I'm actually giving all the profits of that away to the NHS, because they've done such a lovely job lately, especially with the personal thing there. So that's nice, that's on Amazon. Physical version comes out next week. Kindle version's already out now. That's kind of where I'm at. So that's what I do. Oh, and I've also got an incredibly, ordinary mundane job on top of all that.
Cool.
That's me.
What's your interest in the First Doctor, Michael?
Right, well, when I was doing I'll put my cards on the table. I prefer classic Doctor Who to new Doctor Who. I will watch new Doctor Who. I will often enjoy new Doctor Who, but it makes me too nervous because I have a constant nagging feeling that the whole of the world's going to wake up and go, actually, this isn't very good, and then it'll get cancelled. I never enjoy watching Doctor Who when it's on, ever. I'm always too tense. I enjoy a repeat or the second viewing, but the first viewing is basically painful, right? But classic Doctor Who, it pushes all of my emotional response buttons. I grew up with the Target novels, then the VHS, then the DVDs, the lot. It's part of me, classic Who. Right, so First Doctor, my first experience of the First Doctor was in the Five Faces of the Doctor, just like so many others, where we got to see the story that I'll just call The Unearthly Child. We can argue about it in a minute. Yeah, and that's kind of where I started with the First Doctor, but because I was writing Whostrology, I had to watch or listen to, because of the missing stories, every episode of Doctor Who singly, and then be sarcastic about them for the book. So that's what I did. I worked my way methodically through every single every single Doctor Who story that was in existence at the time. And a lot of them I'd never seen. A lot of them I'd never come across. And I just kind of fell in love with the first Doctor because I was just being so methodical. Yes, it wasn't perfect. It was never going to be perfect. And it's older than, a lot of people's relatives. But that's fine. And I know I was using the phrase, it's of its time when I was talking about UFO, but this stuff was of its time, and it's still crackingly good, and it's so much better than people give it credit for. So that's my view of the first Doctor, and I'll probably be defending stories that everybody else goes, what is he talking about? But you know what? That's just me.
Excellent.
So Tony, tell us about your first. Yep.
Well, I don't have a podcast, number one. This is my podcasting debut.
Yay!
So, hurrah for me. I do have a blog called The Patient Centurion, which I didn't start writing until I got to the second season of John Pertwee, but I've been writing a blog on every Doctor Who story in order from then. And then I had to go back, because I'd started watching from the beginning, then started the blog for some obscure reason, second season of John Pertwee. Then when I got to the end, I had to go back to the beginning again to watch Doctors 1 and 2 again to do the blogs on them. Prior to that, my Hartnell experiences were, I suppose, very similar to yours. I saw An Unearthly Child, the proper title, in inverted commas, in the Five Faces of Doctor Who. And then in that sort of period when there was no real home media, I watched very dodgy copies of the stories that did exist at that point on VHS, very, very sort of fuzzily and uncomfortably, and listened to very badly recorded audio copies of the missing stories. And I suppose my opinion was very much the fan, what the fan general view was at that point, because I'd never really seen most of them properly. But I found my rewatch, that kind of thing. He's holding up the discontinuity guide. I found when I watched it properly through in order, and doing it twice really helped as well. But A, you get used to the pacing, so you get used to how it's structured. And B, I started questioning some of the received fan wisdom, TM, about some of the stories. And we'll probably come on to some of those when we discuss them. But so that's my sort of Hartnell experience. And I think it's an as you said, I think it's a much underappreciated era.
I think it's because you have to work at it. It's like if you've got proper ordinary brand new Doctor Who on, you go, oh yeah, look, iPlayer, it's there, or Amazon, it's there, or whatever. So you don't even have to physically get out of your chair, find a disc, put it in, press play. But in the old days, you didn't have to find someone who had the episodes, go to HMV, track them down, save up money specifically to buy whatever, or rummage through car boot sales to find the missing Target novelization for the story that didn't existed, but you wanted to experience everything. You really had to work at it. And even now, once Stuart Lee does this brilliant sketch about it, but basically the hunter-gatherer instinct that it brought out in us has been squished by eBay. You can go, oh, that story's missing. Typey. Oh, it's come 2 days later. Somebody's got it. It cost me £3. It didn't cost £50 or something like that. Or you're like, oh my God, I'm going to have to save up and buy this VHS box set. And it was a trek. It was almost a rite of passage to get these stories because it mattered to us. But now they're kind of out there and you can just get New Who. So that kind of rather gatekeepery of me meant something to me at the time because that's what I had to go through to get them. So that's the first Doctor. That's our physical version of finding the first Doctor. But
Well, should we crack on with revealing the group stats, and then we can fight out the subsequent rounds of the World Cup before we crown a best
can I just,
Doctor Who story
before
ever.
we go any further, I just need to say that I know bugger all about football. I don't know anything about groups or how World Cups are. Sport is God's way of saying there's no sci-fi on the telly.
Okay.
Right? That's it. Okay, so please, if you need to explain things, take your time. I will listen.
So for the uninitiated, generally the way it works is you have 8 groups of 4 teams, and in a football match, in a football tournament, they all play each other, and the winners and you score points for winning and drawing and whatever. And then the top 2 teams from each group go through to a knockout stage. So essentially, we're simulating that. And so we're at the end of this first round, 16 stories will be eliminated from the competition, and the remaining 16 will go into knockout rounds to finally get to a final. And we will actually, the fact that there are 3 of us with an even number of people, there would have been a slight issue in that you could have had lots of draws in the knockout rounds because there's only because there's an odd number. We will have a winner in each case when it gets to the knockout rounds. So let's run through each group, and we can because we've got a lot of groups to get through. We can briefly touch on our thoughts as to why we voted the way we voted. So Group A is the Mythmakers, the Web Planet, the Savages, and the Smugglers. And it would seem that we are all in agreement that the Mythmakers is the top of that group because we each scored it 4. And then we all agreed that the Smugglers is at the bottom of the group on 3 points. and then the Web Planet and so actually we're going to have a slight vote on this one because the Web Planet and the Savages have both scored 8 points between us, and so we're going to have to decide between us which of those 2 goes through in second place. But Tony, if you could pick one story from that group to talk about and tell us, actually, given that this is the one we're going to have to decide, which would you go for over the Web Planet and the Savages for second place in that group, and why?
The Web Planet, but I am a bit of a Web Planet. I mean, the only reason it didn't win this group was because the Mythmakers is of the missing stories is the one that I would really like back because I think it's very, very good. And and we'll probably talk about this at some other point, but I'm a lover of historicals.
Yeah.
So that helps. But I am also, I love the Web Planet. It's one of my favourite, not just one of my favourite Hartnell stories, it's one of my favourite Doctor Who stories of all time. And I know it has many issues, which we don't have time to discuss here. But I also think I just love it, and I appreciate that other people don't. But it's for me it's a brilliant story. It's obviously it's too long, but there are other things about it that other people find more difficult. But I love it, so that's why I would put it before the Savages. Also, the Savages, because it's missing, I'm not sure whether I'm being harsh or not about it.
Yeah,
putting it below the Web Planet. So I would go for the extant story over the missing one.
Okay. And Michael, you scored the Savages at the top of this group, I think. Oh, you put it level with the Mythmakers.
I did.
So you would like the Savages to go through ahead of the Web Planet?
Yes. A couple of reasons. I find the Web Planet difficult to watch because of the sound, the experimental sound. It's a bit migraine-inducing. And also, the Savages, I can see what they were trying to do, right? I totally get what they were trying to do with the Web Planet. But it just, no matter how much goodwill I bring to the story, after 10 minutes, I'm just thinking, I'm watching an episode of Lost in Space. And then I find it back and go, no, I'm not. There's brilliant moments with the Doctor's gold pen. And there's this whole beautiful bit of world building that they're just not brave enough to do now, although they could probably get away with it better. And I get it. I genuinely get why it's got so much love. But the Savages has got Stephen. It's his last story, and it's complicated, and it's got people who are just they're nobody's really truly evil or good, or it's just more complicated, and I want to see that so much more than I want to see Sabi. Yeah.
Okay. So when I scored this, I put the Web Planet above the Savages. I think, like Tony says, that it's much easier to score the story that we can see over the one that's missing. I recognise its flaws in the way that you have laid out, Michael. And I suppose my thing, and I always say this when I talk about Doctor Who, is that I came to most of these stories through the novelisation first. There's a handful of Doctor Who, classic Doctor Who across all eras that I saw first on VHS. But for the majority of these stories, I read them first, and we're trying to judge this on the TV version, which is why there's a certain story that I think is awful as a TV story and is great as a book, which we'll come to when we get to its group. So I think I think the Savages. I like the story from a book point of view. I have heard the missing soundtrack, but it's one that I fear wouldn't necessarily be rehabilitated if we could see it. And I think that's I think that's partly because there's a makeup issue with Frederick Jaeger's character. Because if I'm right, I think he's wearing some form of blackface in it. Because there's.
I was unaware of that.
I don't know because the cover of the book. His face is green. I think in the
it's slightly
in the telesnaps. It's definitely not his normal face color. I think he's definitely wearing some form of darkening makeup.
Yeah, it's slightly hard to tell from the photographs, but it does look like he's been given some darkening makeup.
But if he's green, then
well, as I say, that's just the book cover.
Then you've got is the TARDIS green? Is the TARDIS console green? Yeah. It's like that.
Yes,
exactly. You go, when things painted those colours because that's what shows up on black and white TV.
Also, what I think I say to people now is what really brought home to me how hard it is to judge missing stories is when The Enemy of the World was recovered.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking.
Story when you could see it than it was when you couldn't.
Yeah.
And I think it's very hard to tell. I mean, like the Smugglers, we all, I think, the Smugglers came bottom of the group, but we don't really know what it would be like if we had it on film. People might think of it as like another Aztecs or another whatever. But
the thing is, for me, the reason that I put the Smugglers low down is because I'm just not a big fan of your historicals at all.
You and I will disagree on that.
Yeah.
We can, but I'm with JNT.
In a minority, Mike.
Where's the monsters?
Yeah.
And you're on the.
I'm quite willing to defend every single case.
You're on the side of most of Doctor Who history, Michael. So that's fine. Tony and I will fight our historical corner.
That's never a good thing.
Okay,
Don't put me with the majority.
No, that's fine. We need to before we move on to Group B. Then we need to make a decision collectively.
Well,
is it Web Planet or Savages that's going to go through in the second?
Well, I would argue, and I say this obviously because it goes in my favour, that because two of the three of us put it higher up, it should go through.
That's fine by me.
That's obviously, but that should be the rule going forward. Then, so if I suffer from this rule in the next group, then I suffer from the rule.
In which case, the Web Planet goes through. The Savages narrowly misses out. Okay. So, having said that about historicals, Michael, in Group B, you still scored the Aztecs.
You see, I'm a fickle man
with 3 points. So we've got the Aztecs. It goes through top, Daleks Master Plan second, the Crusade third, and Day of the Doctor fourth. But that is interesting because Michael has given Day of the Doctor 4 points. I gave it 1 because I was sticking with the 4-3-2-1, but Tony's gone so far as to give it 0 points. So we need to talk about why Day of the Doctor and multi-Doctor stories have had different responses from us. So, Michael, go ahead first. Why does Day of the Doctor deserve to go through as the top First Doctor story?
Right, hold on.
Of this group.
Okay, first off, and this might scupper everything. Which one's Day of the Doctor?
That's this
because there's Night of the Doctor, Afternoon of the Doctor, Doctor of the Doctor, and Fish Paste Sandwich of the Doctor.
Okay.
They all came out at the same time.
Name of the Doctor was the cliffhanger at the end of Series 7, where you revealed John Hurt at the end of it.
Yeah, that's the only bit anybody ever remembers of that episode.
That's the one that began with the clip from the Aztecs of the First Doctor going into the TARDIS and Clara saying, "No, you want to go into this one rather than that one."
Right.
And then Night of the Doctor is the Paul McGann prequel prelude to Day of the Doctor. And then Day of the Doctor is the big 50th anniversary, David Tennant, Matt Smith, John Hurt, and then at the end, all the Doctors flying in their TARDISes.
Oh,
and
that's fine. That's
so
absolutely fine. I'll stick.
That's what you were thinking when you voted.
Yeah,
okay.
I'm sticking
with
that.
Why does that brief, literally one line from a First Doctor impersonator, put this through above Aztecs, Daleks' Master Plan, and the Crusade?
Right. Okay. One, I've got no issue with the First Doctor impersonator because I spend far too much time hanging around Big Finish, just listening to everything. Right. So if somebody else is a reasonable First Doctor impersonator, I'll just be around for the story. That's fine. But I see your point, right? Because it's a couple of spliced bits together, but as a whole, is the story something I watch repeatedly, and is it sort of, I don't know, chicken soup for the soul? Yes.
Okay.
So that's a story I will watch if I'm not feeling 100%, and it's one of the few new Who stories I'll suddenly go, oh, do you know what I'm in the mood for? I'll watch that. So if it's the story, it's that. But to be fair, I'll be watching it for John Hurt, and this is the First Doctor. So I can see your argument, because it's not really a First Doctor story. It's lovely to see, hey, why don't you take this TARDIS instead? Which completely messes up everything we've heard recently. But, you know...
It's got 2 continuity for you, which is fine.
I know. Like the guy who works at Star Wars went, don't worry about the continuity. Why? It's made up. What? Yes, we know it's made up, but so is history. It's fine. Sorry, That's a whole different podcast for a whole different time. I love the story. It's one of my favourites, but I can see the argument as to it not being a First Doctor story, and it shouldn't really be here. I bow to the superior linesman in the sky.
Yes, well, it has ended at bottom of the group. So, Tony, why have you scored it so low?
Well, it's a brilliant Doctor Who story. I will agree with Michael on that, absolutely. But it's not a First Doctor story. That's it.
Okay.
Shouldn't.
Okay.
It's. I could pad that out a bit, but fundamentally, that's it. I feel the same about all the multi-Doctor stories.
Yeah. I'd agree with that. It's there to make the numbers up.
Yeah.
I'm definitely going to have a word with you about the 5 Doctors, because I think primarily that is a First Doctor story.
Well, we will. We'll have a conversation about that, because I have interesting thoughts about the 5 Doctors when we get to that.
Okay.
The other thing I would add about the First Doctor and multi-Doctor stories is that, and Michael and I have had conversations about this before, but I love watching the First Doctor era and trying to not think about what comes next as much as possible.
Yeah.
And so, although the same applies to all but Patrick Troughton's final story, where you finally find out who the Time Lords are, the Second Doctor feels like he slots. Yes. The Second Doctor feels much more like he slots into that whole Gallifreyan mythology than the First Doctor does.
Yeah.
And so, obviously, every subsequent multi-Doctor story with the First Doctor in has involved Gallifrey in some way, shape, or form. And obviously, that line in Day of the Doctor is the First Doctor saying the word Gallifrey. And it just feels wrong to me. 5 Doctors was the first Doctor Who story I ever watched. So Richard Hurndall was essentially my way in. So I have fond feelings about that. But as I've gone on as a fan, my feeling is that the First Doctor era works best when you forget about all the Gallifreyan trappings that come later.
And if you watch it as a member of the public at the time.
Yes. And there's a lot in there, and there's a great video that was produced recently about the idea that when it first started, Doctor Who was essentially as far as we could tell, a human. In that he was born on another planet, but he was descended from humans. He'd built the TARDIS himself, and then for whatever reason was exiled from his planet. And there's nothing really
I'm still
contradicts.
Leaning that direction even more now with the current
yes. Anyway,
Children of Time thing.
So that's my reason for kind of. Although I agree, Day of the Doctor is wonderful as an anniversary celebration, it's not a great first Doctor story.
Okay,
So,
I bow to your superior thing on that one.
Yeah,
so what have we got left?
Before we move on from that group, we need to talk about the fact that Crusade has come third, and so will be eliminated from the competition. We all gave it 2 points. So
this is one where I think I might have made a mistake. I have over time I have gradually come to prefer the Crusade in this group. I've come to prefer the Crusade to the Aztecs.
Ooh, interesting.
There are issues with the Crusade to do with blackface, which is a whole different kettle of fish for another day. But I think the story that it's beautifully written. And it's really well played by everybody involved. It's like everybody ups their game in that story. Right. And I feel I should have swapped the Aztecs and the Crusade around.
Yeah.
I still put the Dalek Master Plan top, but I think I would have swapped the Crusade for the Aztecs. Even though I think the Aztecs is great.
I mean, if you did that, Tony, then that ultimately wouldn't change the positions in the group,
okay,
but it would make it tighter. So I think we're happy to leave it like that.
Yeah,
I mean, I agree. As a story, I love it. The novelization is fantastic.
Yeah,
and I think for me, this is just one of those that suffers from being half missing, and in particular, its final episode being missing, because unlike something like the Moon Base, or the Invasion, or the Ice Warriors, or Wheel in Space, for that matter, is that in each of those stories, although they're partially or mostly missing, the final episode of the story exists. And the Crusade is the only one of those stories, I think, is the only one of those stories that's partially there. Oh, apart from Dalek's Master Plan. Those are the two partially existing stories where the final episode is not one of the ones that exists.
Mm.
And although the stuff that William Russell recorded for the VHS
and 10th Planet. Yeah.
Oh yeah, of course, 10th Planet. Yes, you're exactly right. We'll come to 10th Planet. I have thoughts about 10th Planet. Anyway, that VHS stuff that William Russell recorded, which is on the Lost in Time DVD if you press play all. That's lovely, and it's a lovely way of kind of telling the rest of the story. I think for me, it's one of those ones that suffers because it's partly missing.
Yeah.
And that's fair enough.
And I prefer, I do. I love the Aztecs. It's one of the first Hartnell stories that I saw on VHS. Have had both DVD editions of it, and it is marvelous. And obviously Dalek's Master Plan. I think it's just it's just an epic, and it deserves to go through.
Yeah.
Thoughts on the Crusade, Michael? Before we move on.
Crusade, no, you covered it all. Dalek's Master Plan, I gave it a 1. Just don't enjoy it very much. Sorry. It's a Dalek story, and you're like, oh look, some more Daleks, and their Master Plan is just. People bang on about the Pertwee thing being an allegory for joining European Union and miners' strikes and things, but this wants to be an allegory and just doesn't get round to it. I don't know. I've never embraced it as much as everyone else seems to, but that's probably just me. Well, I don't know. I mean, you can try and convince me another time if you want, but
no, it's fine.
I wasn't impressed with the aliens. Also, I was never as taken with the costume design as I think I was supposed to be, and I think I just couldn't quite get past that. But I don't know. I'm willing to be convinced, but to be fair, that's why I give it a 1.
Well, that's fair. I mean, you can vote against it in the knockout stage. Time presses on, so we need to move on to Group C, so here we go. The rankings fall out this way. An Unearthly Child and the Daleks go through as first and second. Celestial Toymaker and the Five Doctors draw in third place. And again, we have this disagreement between me and Tony and Michael about the place of that multi-doctor story. So we let Michael, you go ahead with 5 Doctors, and then we'll cover Celestial Toymaker before we say bye-bye to it.
Okay, Hartnell would have been in the 5 Doctors if he'd been alive. If he'd been alive and in the story, and the story played out exactly the same way, I think that would have been a perfectly reasonable story. That's it. I mean, I know everyone just goes, but it's Herndl, it's not really Hartnell. Yeah, they did the best with what they've got. They couldn't use computers, they couldn't do anything. They just got some bloke who they'd seen in Blake 7 who could wear a wig. And that was kind of it. But he did a perfectly reasonable job. They could have hired Jeffrey Belden and done a better job, but they didn't. And that's fine. But that's it. The 5 Doctors is a really important story for so many people. And it's a first Doctor story because Tom's not available. And the 5th Doctor, it's the first and last Doctors of the time working together. And that's just lovely. And Caroline Ford brings the whole thing together. It's just nice. And I know there's the whole, but it's the first Doctor in Gallifrey, and is that a good thing? And then it's like, oh, look, a Dalek in the Death Zone, but they weren't allowed to play, were they? I don't know. We can't remember. Nobody's ever mentioned the Death Zone before. That's fine. But, there's not a lot of people in England go on about some of the really dodgy stuff that we've done in the past. But we kind of know about it. We just don't talk about it. So that's fine. I can accept that. So I can accept the Death Zone. But then there's the whole thing about the Time Lords knowing about the Daleks and having them play the game. But when the first Doctor arrives on Skaro, he doesn't know who the Daleks are. And he doesn't know much about them as time goes by. So that melts your head if you think about it too much. So, I don't know. I like the story. Let's go back to basics and go with that.
Yep. Yeah, I have to say, if I didn't have this blanket, I'm not counting multiple Doctor stories, I would have put the 5 Doctors above the Celestial Toymaker.
Fair enough.
And I would agree on that.
But I don't have a problem with Herndl either. Actually, I think that's fine. I think he's very good in it.
Yeah.
And this one, and it's obviously not in this one, but this one and the 2 Doctors are the 2 multi-Doctor stories where my blanket zero thing is at its most questionable.
Fair enough.
Interesting. So I suppose I agree with a lot of what you both said. I think if he'd still been alive, which obviously is a big if because he wasn't, he would have been in even worse health than when he briefly appeared in the 3 Doctors. So that's even more questionable. But anyway, going with what we've got, as I said, the first time I saw it, right, I'd never seen Hartnell. Obviously, Hartnell is briefly in that clip at the beginning, so you do get to see Hartnell at the beginning. But then if you've never seen him before, you're going to quickly forget that. And so from a first watch, I loved it. It's brilliant. It's one of my favourite Doctor Who stories. It is comfort food Doctor Who. I've probably seen it more times than almost any other Doctor Who story, with possibly the exception of Spearhead from Space. I think I have more of a problem with Herndl's performance than I did, because I think it plays into the stereotype fan-received wisdom version of the first Doctor.
Yes.
Because if you have the sort of like the one-line description of each Doctor. Okay, so you have like you have John Pertwee's Dandy, you have Patrick Troughton's Cosmic Hobo, okay? And if you think First Doctor, okay, the received fan wisdom is crotchety old man. Okay? And I think that Herndl overplays that aspect of the character to the detriment of the whale of a time that Hartnell is having for a considerable part of his run. And I think it's one of those things when you kind of get past the received fan wisdom and you watch a lot of Hartnell, you realise actually he has got a twinkle in his eye and a spring in his step. A lot of it. Yeah. And I think
the impishness wasn't there. Okay.
And I think there are moments where Herndl gets that. like particularly at the very end when they're all together and there's that sort of, oh, you did quite well, and there's that twinkle in his eye, and you kind of think, oh, if he'd got that more often than there's the one that always sticks in my head where he goes, I wonder what happened to the other one, and you're just like, oh, you're overplaying the sort of crotchety old First Doctor. And this is me kind of analysing it to the nth degree, and I should probably shut up. So, Tony, go ahead.
Sorry, it actually reminds me sometimes of how people play Sherlock Holmes. One of the reasons I liked Jeremy Brett was he managed to remember that there is a sort of mischievous quality to Sherlock Holmes at some points, that he isn't entirely deadly serious and grumpy and drug-addled, that sometimes he's deliberately trying to wind people up for the purposes of his own amusement. And I think, I think that's right. You're right with Herndl. I think that plays into that illusion of what the First Doctor is like if you haven't watched any First Doctor or a lot of First Doctor.
Okay. I am completely willing to go with the 0 mark. You've kind of convinced me of where you're at. I get that. That's not a problem. So if there's an issue with ranking, I am willing.
It comes firmly at the bottom of the group, along with Celestial Toymaker. So,
fair enough.
Now, received fan wisdom, and I think what I'm saying here is a celebration by Peter Haining, which had an episode guide in it by, I think, Jeremy Bentham. Not the philosopher Jeremy Bentham, but the kind of elder statesman of Doctor Who fandom, Jeremy Bentham, who I think is still alive. Probably he must be in his 70s or something. And there are 2 stories that stick in my mind from that, and one is the Celestial Toymaker, which is the best thing since sliced bread, and the other is the Gunfighters, which is the worst Doctor Who story ever.
I was about to say
that's received fan wisdom. Those stories are next to each other in that season. Celestial Toymaker leads directly into the Gunfighters, and my opinion is that those should be reversed, because I find the Celestial Toymaker tedious in the extreme, and the Gunfighters is a lot more amusing than it was made out to be. What are other people's thoughts on Celestial Toymaker?
I will say 2 things before. Sorry, Michael, I'll get in before you.
No, go for it. You go for it.
I have one. I have very strong things to say about the Gunfighters, so I'll save that to when we get to the Gunfighters. They're almost all entirely positive, but we'll save that. I agree with you about that Jeremy Bentham episode guide. That I watched the Celestial Toymaker, and I do think, to be fair to the Celestial Toymaker, I do wonder what it would be like if it existed in its entirety, and because you get the impression from the novelization and from the way people talk about that story that it's a lot to do with the atmosphere and the creepiness of the story. And from the single surviving episode, you don't really get that. It just looks very silly and very tedious. Even though it's got Stephen in it, who I think is a Peter Purvis, who I think is a brilliant companion. So my picture, the Celestial Toymaker is probably my least favourite First Doctor story.
And it's racist. Of course.
You've covered it. Well, right.
I'm not
this
sure about
seems
that.
to keep popping up. Racist in the sense of they hired an actor who had a bit of gravitas to play a character with a bit of gravitas, and then they took it down a really weird route. Yeah,
I think there's 2 potential issues with it. One is that there's an implication that the Celestial Toymaker, there's a sort of Oriental quality to the Celestial Toymaker.
Yeah, but that's more the costume, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and there's some question about whether he's got his eyes sort of
Wen Chang'd.
Yeah,
talons. Yeah.
But
there's also the fact that the word celestial in some quarters is a derogatory term for the Chinese.
Yeah.
So
Celestial Chang.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are issues with that. But also there's the song, which they on the audio release they fade it down, the eeny meeny miny mo.
Yeah.
It's one of the other versions, is it?
Yes, eeny meeny miny mo, catcher
N-word by its toe. Which they fade out on the audio release. And even in 1960, was it 65, 66?
Yeah.
Everybody knew that wasn't what you said. Now, whether it was, I mean, how you judge these things, I don't know. For me, it just adds sort of a final nail in the coffin of the Celestial Toymaker. But
the Celestial Toymaker is the one with the moving the blocks triangle game, though, isn't it? Yeah, which is like literally the only bit that stayed with me. So that's probably why it's quite far down. Billy Bunder's in that as well. Non-copyright breaching Billy Bunder.
Yes.
Yeah.
Also, it's when I did my blog about this, I almost wrote a longer rant about it, but it's an insult to William Hartnell, that story.
He's on holiday, isn't he?
No, they wanted to get rid of him.
Yeah.
So they made him invisible because I think the plan was they were going to make him invisible and then have another actor come in when he became visible again.
And then the show we would never have had the show that we have.
Yeah.
Yes.
But so I think that it's just. I mean, really, it's not. If I'm arguing about giving 0 points to multi-Doctor stories because they're not first Doctor stories, you can almost argue the same thing about the Celestial Toymaker. Not you can't really, I know, but.
No.
Anyway, we've all agreed it's gone.
Yes. The irony for me was that I think of the 4 stories that made it to the semi-finals on Twitter, 3 of them had an episode that Hartnell was on holiday for, which I thought was ironic. Let us move on to Group D. So we're taking our time getting through these. So that group, Edge of Destruction and the Keys of Marinus, go through on 9 points each. The Dalek Invasion of Earth, which won the Doctor Who Magazine World Cup, comes in third on 8 points, and then Twice Upon a Time, the Capaldi finale, comes bottom. And again, I scored it 1, Tony scored it none, and Michael gave it 2. So you're clearly not as much a fan of that multi-Doctor story, Michael.
No. Just no. I didn't like what they did with Bill. It followed on the Glass Woman storyline was just like watching paint dry. I didn't care at all, and the only thing I enjoyed was seeing the first Doctor at the end of the 10th planet and just wishing they'd gone away and made the 10th planet like that. Make that final episode of 10th Planet instead. Remake it. They've got your costumes. You've got your set built. You've got everything you need. Just do that. I'll watch that instead. Do it multi-camera just to keep the people at Radio Free Scaro happy. It'll be fine. Shoot it in 3x4. Right? Release it on VHS. Don't care. Right? Do that instead. I just sat there going, oh, was it nearly finished? I was not a happy bunny watching that storyline, and it just felt like, oh, hang on, Mark Gatiss. That's the one with Mark Gatiss in, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where you find out that he's apparently related to the Brigadier. Yeah, right. Yeah. Sorry, yes. I just was not. My level of... I've actually learned... My reviews at the time are probably reasonably pleasant about it, but since then, they've just gone downhill. I'm not a big fan.
Oh, it's one of the few... Oh, go on, Tony.
Yeah, sorry, I was about to say, I actually quite enjoy it up to a point. I like the fact that it starts with the first Doctor played by William Hartnell, and when he leaves at the end, it goes back to William Hartnell.
Yeah,
I think that's a nice touch. I think it's a nice way of doing it. I have issues with some of the way the first Doctor is portrayed in that story, in terms of...
Oh, yeah, because weren't the lines all taken from episodes, but they were all taken out of context. So everything he'd said elsewhere, according to Stephen. But, like, I'll smack your bottom, and you're like, that's not something that my first Doctor would say, but he would say it as a comedy thing.
Yeah.
But he wouldn't say it meaning it.
He said it of Susan, and I think...
Yeah, but you never thought he would meant it.
No, I think A, it's of its time, and B, he's referring to his granddaughter in character.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think to then take that line and have it totally out of context and apply it to Bill was a bit, yeah.
Shall we use the word questionable and move on?
It's one of the few Doctor Who stories that I never ever want to watch again, and because it's one of the ones that's been novelised, it's the only Target novelisation I never intend to own. Because
I have a spare copy in the boot of my car. I was going to post to you. Won't bother.
I've no doubt. I've heard that Paul Cornell kind of retcons it, so the First Doctor is sort of having a joke in the way that he behaves. But I just think it was completely misjudged. And also, and I suppose you probably have different opinions on this with your listening to Big Finish, Michael. I just don't think David Bradley works. In the part,
he works well with the Bradley First Doctor stuff. I've chosen to believe that that's happening in a parallel universe,
which is fine. It's absolutely fine.
Because I think you're right. It's not just Bradley. It's everybody else.
Yes,
all of the cast sound different to the TV. So I've just gone, right, this is a reboot or something else. It's its own creature. That's what I've gone with that. Otherwise, I just sit there going, no.
I think Bradley is a very bad First Doctor.
Okay.
I hate to say it. I think he's when they do the cut from Hartnell to him and he picks up the line. I just think I know it's his take on the part, so I'm not knocking the actor. I just think it's not a very good First Doctor, and there's a couple of moments where I think he works, but I think it's but mostly I just never it never feels right to me, and obviously you can't do a caricature, and obviously I'm waffling on a bit too much about all of these, so I'll stop there. But I have issues with Twice Upon a Time. But it's not awful from my point of view.
I think you're right, Michael.
Coming with faint praise.
Yeah, the one thing I'd add is I think you're right, Michael. The best first. I mean, we sort of did get him as the First Doctor in Big Finish Unbound. Jeffrey Baildon is the obvious actor to play.
But he'd already died by then.
He died by the time of Twice Upon a Time, I think.
Yeah,
and he was mentally unwell. He was a bit senile by the end.
But he hadn't died by the time of the Five Doctors, as you said before. Like he could have easily. Anyway, let's move on. So the one that we really have to talk about here is and this is because I've scored it very low. Is Dalek Invasion of Earth, which
how dare you defend that young man?
Well, I mean, no, you both gave it 3 and I gave it 2. It
is 3 because Marinus deserves a 4.
Okay, because you gave Marinus 4, and Tony and I both gave Edge of Destruction 4. So we can talk about those when we get to the knockout round.
Okay.
Dalek Invasion of Earth as a TV story, because we're judging this primarily on the TV story.
Yes,
fair enough.
The Dalek Invasion of Earth is the third best version of that story. And I know I'm in a minority here because I ran a poll on my Twitter a while ago, and I think it got about, I don't know, 50 votes or something. And I'm literally the only person that said the novelization is the best version of that story. And the majority of people said the TV version was the best version, and then there was a good few people who said the film version was the best version.
No, I'm probably in the film camp.
Well, yeah.
Me too.
And I suppose I suspect the order in which I experienced the story was movie, book, TV.
Yeah.
Or possibly it was book. Possibly it was book, movie, TV. I know that the TV was the last version that I saw of it, which probably colours how I feel about the TV version, because I'd read Terence Hicks's brilliant novelisation of it. I had seen the story told in half the time in colour. With much better special effects, and the first time I watched it on DVD, I did have the special CGI flying saucer turned on, so there was a sort of mitigating factor there. I just find it dull. It just drags because it's, and I know we've said this before. Like, this is the 60s. This is supposed to be watched one episode at a time, a week apart, and so I think there's an element of you have to give that leeway to every single Doctor Who story from the classic era, and particularly the 60s. But for me, this one really, on that score, falls down. And I love Richard Martin. He's a delightful gentleman. He comes across really well in all the DVD documentaries. I have met him, and I have an unreleased interview with him that I recorded at ShadowCon because his wife was in UFO. So while she was on stage, I was interviewing him in the green room. He's absolutely delightful, but I think he just was too ambitious for a TV studio. So all the stuff in Dalek Invasion of Earth that's on film is brilliant. The sort of the deserted London stuff, the sort of running through the streets with the wheelchair, Daleks and
you don't mention the buses that are running in the background.
Yeah, all that stuff is just brilliant. But he's just too ambitious for, what is it, 3 cameras in a studio, and there's just too much of the studio stuff that just drags, or you kind of go switch camera, and you just know that the camera's just not quite in the right position, so he can't switch to the other camera. So you're kind of stuck on a wide shot, and it's just and I give so many classic Doctor Who stories leeway for that kind of stuff, and for some reason I just can't do that for Dalek Invasion of Earth, and I think it's because I experienced it twice in better forms first. So whenever it gets kind of lauded as like one of the best First Doctor stories ever, and it wins something like this Doctor Who World Cup on Twitter, I'm just like, have you lost leave of your senses, people?
There's there's a
guys,
thing that
defend it.
Yeah. Well, hang on. Can I? Right. There's a thing that exists called drafting, and it's a way that you teach kids how to make their work better, and they do their work and they present it, and rather than going, "I've finished this," and you go, "Very nice," you go, "Actually, you could alter this, you could cut this, and you could make these." I don't know. You're drawing a butterfly. Perhaps you want to do the antennae differently or make everything symmetrical. And the kid goes away, comes back, does it again. And that one's better. And you go, "That's so much better." And the kid gets all excited. And then they take it away and they do it again. They bring it back. And that produces a final and considerably better piece of work. It's a sort of open mindset thing. Now, with this, you've just described what's happened to this story. You've got your TV version, which is the first draft. Then you've got the movie version, which is better because they've just made it better. And then you've got the book, which Terence will have sat down and gone, "Right, let's watch this movie," and then put all the best bits of the movie into the book, and then the script into the book, and then just make something even nicer. So that's what's happened. It's all the same, but it just gets steadily better. But because of the first exposure rule, which is usually your favourite version of something is the thing you come across first, like people who listen to The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy on the radio are really fanatical about how great it is on the radio first, but if you've watched it on TV first, you usually have a soft spot for that, and then you'll go, "Well, I love the radio, but the TV's the one that plays in your head." And those poor, unfortunate people who watch the movie first, they go back and go, "Well, I get these other things, but I like this film version," and it's the first exposure thing, so that's got to be a part of this as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, I totally agree that it's well, all of these things are subjective, and I agree that is probably what's going on with me, and it just means that sadly I cannot enjoy the TV version and will not rate it in a poll. Tony, what do you think?
I think you've pretty much covered everything that I would say. I enjoy the film version more. It's more fun, and they cut out a lot of unnecessary nonsense from it. The TV version does a better job of being what would have happened if the Nazis had invaded England. So there's a darker quality to the TV version that isn't in the film version. That I think it probably misses a little bit. But and the novelization is fantastic. But yeah, I think you're right. I think the TV version is the third best version of this story.
But crucially, Tony, you have still scored it above Keyser Marinus, which is going through in its place. Yes,
because, and I again, this is. I think I with this one, I think I erred on the side of comfort. I've watched the Keyser Marinus now, I think 3 times, and each time I watch it, I do enjoy it slightly more. But the first time I saw it, I thought it was awful. but then I kind of, and I still don't think it's never going to be one of my favourite Hartnell stories. But it's got good things. I mean, I should say here that it's very rare there's a Doctor Who story that I don't find something to enjoy in. So there aren't eras or stories that I won't ever watch because I can always find something in them. So with the Keys and Mariners, there's some interesting stuff in there, but I just don't. For me, it just doesn't do it overall. And I think I slightly prefer the Dalek Invasion of Earth because even with all its negatives, it's Daleks. I know that's a terrible thing to say, and it's Earth, and the London stuff is amazing.
Moving on to Group E, this has a clear winner, which I think was in the final of the Doctor Who magazine.
Yeah.
And that's the Time Meddler, which we've all given 4 points to, so that properly tops the group.
Yay.
And then squeaking through in second place, just a point ahead of its rival, we have The Rescue, followed by Marco Polo, and then The Sensorites comes a further point back behind that. So clearly one standout story in this group, followed by 3 that we're all...
I must admit, I do wish that I'd given The Sensorites a 3 and The Rescue a 2.
Oh, okay, well that buggers up the whole group then, Michael.
Well, in that case, ignore me, and we'll move on.
Because if you did that, then they'd all end up on 6 points, and we'd have to argue which of those 3 stories goes through. So the rescue deserves to go through ahead of Marco Polo and the Sensorites. Tony definitely doesn't think that because you gave the rescue 1 point. So you clearly prefer Marco Polo to go through. Why Marco Polo?
As I said, I'm a big fan of the historicals. I think this story has a lot in its favour. Again, it's missing, so maybe if we found it, it wouldn't be quite as good as I think it is. But yeah, I really enjoy Marco Polo. It's obviously like a lot of 60 stories. It's 7 episodes is too many. And I don't mind The Rescue. I think The Rescue's great. But in this 4, I was like, no, Marco Polo above. It was quite a tight group from my point of view, apart from the Time Meddler, which was obviously the winner.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Michael, your thoughts on Marco Polo and the Sensorites?
Oh, I am such an old school crappy fan. I don't want to watch Marco Polo because it's a historical and there's no monsters. Oh, you know what? Just make a little doll of me, pull the string, and that's all it ever says. It's ridiculous. Just do a little sample you can play back. Right. The Sensorites, like I said, I would probably have changed the order, but that would have just messed everything up. I do enjoy the Sensorites. I love the idea of a race whose you can't tell apart unless they're wearing a sash. It's different. Let's go. We're all in disguise. What have we done? We've all thrown our sashes into the middle of the room and put them on. It's like some weird party. I like the massive feet. I like the idea of the removal of the lock and that bit where the head looms up. And it's got some nice moments. Not great hours. It's like Wagner. But, yeah. Sensorites is all right. I've not seen Marco Polo. Like you said, it could be fantastic. But I've experienced the audio, the books, and it just didn't really do much for me.
Yeah, the novelisation doesn't do it justice. I'll say that.
Yeah, fair enough.
Well, I don't know. I quite enjoy the novelisation, but the soundtrack is definitely the way to experience it because it's got some great performances in it, and like I suppose the problem is, like other stories we've talked about, it would have a problem if it turned up, and it also has a problem if they try to animate it because you have a bunch of white actors playing Mongols and Chinese. So that's a problem. In the same way that the Crusade is a problem, in the same way that whatever Kevin Stoney's playing in Dalek's Master Plan is a problem. But on a pure
playing Kevin Stoney.
Yes, on a pure kind of performance level, I love it. Darren Nesbitt, anything Darren Nesbitt's in is just fantastic.
Fair,
and
you're not gonna. Here's an important thing I've just noticed. The 3 stories which were bubbling under have all got quite decent Susan roles, and the Time Meddler, no Susan.
Well, the Rescue's also no Susan because it's Vicky's first
story. Of course,
story.
Yes, Vicky's first story.
Yes, yeah, no, you're right. Marco Polo and the Sensorites both have good stuff for Susan in. But obviously, I still rated the Rescue higher than Marco Polo, and that's purely for the reason that I think Susan is generally the weak link in that first TARDIS team. And that's not Carol Ann Ford's fault. I think it's largely the fact that she was supposed to be telepathic and she gets occasional bits of telepathy to do, and then she's not well served by the writing. And Vicky, Maureen O'Brien is just brilliant. Like, my favourite TARDIS team is Ian, Barbara, Vicky. Which I get, and once Ian and Barbara have gone, and you've got Stephen and Vicky, they work really well together. So, and I love the Rescue because it's nice and short and snappy, and because it's got Ray Barrett doing Stingray in it. So if you had and obviously this is because we are ostensibly posting this Doctor Who podcast on a Jerry Anderson podcast. If you had watched Stingray the previous year, which I guess a lot of kids who watched Doctor Who would have watched Stingray, Stingray has Ray Barrett voicing the leader of the good guys and the leader of the bad guys, as Commander Shaw and Titan. And he does both. He basically is playing both those voices in The Rescue.
Yep.
So spoilers, Bennett in The Rescue is basically Commander Shaw, voice-wise, obviously not character-wise, and then Quillian is Titan. So if you've watched Stingray and you know those voices, you know exactly what's going on in The Rescue from the off, just by listening to his vocal performance, which I love. And it's got some great moments for Hartnell in confronting him at the end. So I that's why I put it through above Marco Polo.
Right.
Interesting fact about Marco Polo, which again, Michael and I, we always talk about The Prisoner. And we did our Prisoner watch as part of UFOcast. The Prisoner episode, It's Your Funeral, is a 3-way Marco Polo reunion.
Oh, no, there's homework involved.
Yeah, no, I'll explain. So Darren Nesbitt, Darren Nesbitt, Mark Eden,
one I got,
and Martin, whatever his name, who plays Kublai Khan. So Darren Nesbitt, who's Tigana, plays the new number 2. Mark Eden plays his henchman, one of the several number 14s I think we have in the show, and then Martin, whatever his name is, plays the old watchmaker. Yep. So they've got very different roles in the Prisoner episode, but it's a prison reunion. Anyway, we're gonna have to move on to Group F, which so I've got thoughts on this. So it's all very close.
I can predict here that my score for the massacre is not the same as Martin's.
As Michael's, you mean?
Michael's, sorry.
Yes, it's not. You scored it 4. Michael scored it 1.
There's a surprise.
I scored it 2. Well, so here we go. This is probably the group where we most diverge, and so the scores have come out almost exactly the same. So this group, we have 9, 8, 7, 6. I'm gonna do this in reverse order because the story that's topped the group is absolutely hilarious. So in 4th place with 6 points is Planet of Giants, which I gave 3 to. Tony gave 1. Michael gave 2. In 3rd place with 7 points is The Massacre, which I gave 2 points to. Tony gave it 4. Michael gave it 1, so you can fight that one out. And then we have in 2nd place The 10th Planet, which I gave 1. You guys gave 3 and 4, so we're gonna have that fight. And then topping the group is The Space Museum.
That's hilarious.
Which I gave 4 points to. Tony gave 2 points to, and Michael gave 3 points to. So let's go with Tony. Defend for us The Massacre.
Well, we've already discussed my love of historicals. It's also, and this is not the time to have this discussion because it's a long discussion, It's also the story in which Peter Purves saves Doctor Who by holding a story together while William Hartnell. I mean, it's hard to tell, obviously, because his bits when he's playing the Abbot of Amboise are not there.
That's a massive shame.
Yeah, so you don't know, but Peter Purves holds that story together, and it's brilliant. I just find I love all the political machinations. It's like it's a kind of like, I mean, I'm being massively over the top here. It's kind of like a 25-minute series of I Claudius with added TARDIS. So that's why I like it. So I'll stop there because I know we've got time shortages. So that's why I love it.
Okay. A brief word for Michael. Why is the Massacre the bottom of the group, and why is 10th Planet top?
Okay, 10th Planet top, Cybermen, and Regeneration. Massacre at the bottom, don't know it half as well as I should. What I do know is actors playing two parts at once, and everyone knows how much I love those storylines. Not even remotely. I'm just not fond of them going, oh, we need to keep the actor amused. Let's show his range or their range, and then they get them to do a different part with a mustache or a beard or something. And I'm not fond of those storylines, but it's a historical about a period of time that I knew nothing about, and for that reason, it should have gone higher up, because that's what Doctor Who's actually for, to educate me. So, yeah, I would watch it. If they found it now, I'd watch it in a heartbeat. But that's it. But, Cybermen and Regeneration and Cybermen, that's it.
Oh, can I just get in a plug for something that's not mine? If you want to get a better appreciation of the Massacre, then I highly recommend, and I might mispronounce his name here, James Corey Smith's Black Archive on the Massacre. It's a brilliant little guide to the whole story historically and the way it was made. So I highly recommend that.
Okay.
Cool. So I'm going to weigh in. So I'm going to tell you why the 10th Planet's crap, and why the Space Museum tops the group. And this was a conversation that was had on Twitter throughout this thing, of people kind of going, why the heck is the 10th Planet doing so well? And I was also doing the whole why is Dalek Invasion of Earth doing so well. But anyway, because 10th Planet basically made it to the semi-finals and then got knocked out by the Time Meddler. So I don't really like Cybermen stories. There are very few that I entirely enjoy, and given that one of those that I really enjoy is Revenge of the Cybermen, you can probably take what I say next with a pinch of salt. So Cybermen stories not my big thing, although I think they are done quite well here because this is the original concept of what they are. So I'll give it that. Again, Hartnell's not in it for an episode.
Yeah.
And it's one of those stories. And if you're a new series person who's never watched First Doctor before, how have you ended up listening to this? But if you are, the 10th Planet is to William Hartnell what Planet of the Ood is to David Tennant. And I say that as somebody who likes Planet of the Ood. But in both cases, if the Doctor hadn't been there, nothing would have changed. Okay, because basically all the Doctor does is turn up at the beginning and go, "Oh, you're going to have some visitors from this planet that's arrived," and it's one of the few times that the First Doctor knows what's going on, because the First Doctor, like you said, he arrives on Skaro, he doesn't know who the Daleks are, right? There's very few times where the First Doctor kind of knows what's going on, because this is his first time out into the universe. Obviously, we later learn that the First Doctor spent some time at school learning about stuff. But that in itself is probably a bit of a retcon. So this is one of those times where the Doctor turns up and he goes, I know what's going to happen. You're going to have some visitors from that planet. The visitors turn up, and then Mondas explodes because it drains too much energy from the Earth. Okay, the Doctor doesn't do anything to precipitate any of that. Like, if the Doctor hadn't been there, what happens would have happened. Right?
Doesn't he bring Ben and Polly do stuff?
Ben and Polly do stuff. in that Ben Ganner gets to wander around with a radiation suit and sort of nobble Cybermen with a bit of radioactive material. But the essential overarching story of Mondas comes back, Cybermen try to invade, Mondas blows up. I suppose you could argue that if the Doctor and Ben and Polly hadn't been there, then Cutler might have launched the Z-bomb, the Z-bomb, and radioactivized half of the planet Earth. Or the Cybermen might have used it to blow up Earth. I suppose you could argue that. But I'm talking myself out of this now. Anyway, look, largely...
No, it's fine. I understand the argument completely, yeah.
Hartnell's not in it for an episode. And although he gets some good speeches, it's not a great story for him. And and although it's significant from a regeneration point of view, the reason for his regeneration again is not as it will become in later stories. That he's giving up his life to do something heroic or anything. Which is not to say that I'm overly keen on that concept either. But it's just he goes out with a whimper, which I think is sad. We've already talked about the Celestial Toymaker could have been his swan song, and then where would the show have been? So as a significant piece of Doctor Who, it's really important. But as a story that represents the First Doctor and deserves to go through, I think it doesn't. But you guys have outvoted me, and it goes through in second place, so that's fine. Before we quickly, because we're running out of time, Space Museum. I just love the Space Museum. It has a really terrible reputation, but I think it's the first episode is brilliant, and the other 3 episodes are hilarious.
Well, I give it a 3 for the same reason.
Yeah.
It's not as terrible as fan reputation would lead you to believe.
Yes. The fact that it has a documentary on it on the DVD by Robert
Shearman,
that is basically defending the Space Museum. Like, it has a reputation that precedes it onto the DVD. The fact that it has to have this documentary on the DVD saying, no, actually, this is a good story. I think the thing is, if you've bought it on DVD, you know it's a good story. But yeah, that first episode is one of the best first episodes of any story ever. Because it's one of the rare occasions where Doctor Who actually, although it's a show with a time machine in it, it rarely does time travel stories. It's just brilliant, and then the rest of it is just quite funny, as they sort of get involved in this sort of hilarious revolution. So, and Vicky being brilliant.
He's brilliant in it. Yeah.
So we are rapidly running out of time. So let's quickly move on to Group G and H, and we will reconvene at another time to do the other things. So Group G. War Machines comes top, followed by the Ark, but the Ark only just beats Galaxy 4, and the Three Doctors comes bottom. Again, we're not going to talk about that because we know why multi-Doctor stories are ending up at the bottom of groups in this thing. It's
despite the fact that I'm giving them 4 points.
You gave it 4. Three Doctors I like less than the 5 Doctors, but it's still a lovely story. But as far as the First Doctor goes, it just reminds you that William Hartnell wasn't well. Anyway, so... who wants to talk about Galaxy 4, which has just been pipped to the second place by the Ark? Why has it not made it through?
Well, I can sum this up completely with my next question. That's the one with the Chumbleys in, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes. And the Dravin.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, it's... Well, I think you've summed it up there completely. It's the attractive people. They're the villains. The ugly people. They're the heroes. Star Trek.
I think in its execution, it's very not Star Trek.
Okay.
I can understand why people don't like it. And particularly the gender politics of it is a bit
unsubtle.
Yeah.
Right, that's for me. That's it.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll go with that.
And we can talk about the War Machines and the Ark when we talk about them in the knockout round. Okay, Group H. We have to talk about this because Michael is in massive disagreement with Tony and I. And again, this is your I don't like historicals thing coming through here, Michael. Tied for...
It's a very specific thing with the Romans. But you go for it.
Interesting. So tied for first place because Luke, me and Tony have both given it 4 points, and Michael's given it 1. You have the Romans. The Gunfighters comes in second, and then the Chase just loses out by a couple of points, and the Reign of Terror comes at the bottom of the group. Obviously, this is a group of historical heavy group. We clearly none of us really like the Reign of Terror, so let's ignore that. So let's talk about the Chase not making it through, and then we can have a brief chat about the Romans before we wrap up for this episode.
Right.
The Chase. Michael, I think you rated this quite highly.
I rank the Chase as a 3. It's and this is a word I use a lot on the TDP. It's a romp. It's literally a chase, and I love the bit with Frankenstein's monster and Dracula in the funhouse. I like that. I like the Mary Celeste bit. I like them coming out of the sand. It's basically Nation just going with his pack of cards, going sand planet, water, done. It's like top trumps. It's pointless, but it's also part of the time war for me. That's it. So I can retcon it into new stuff and make the new stuff better. I can just have it on in the background and it's fun, and Howell Bennett going, I'm a fish person, but I'm a bit dry, and all that business. It's just fun. That's why I gave it a 3.
Yeah. What did you think? Because Tony, you and I both... Tony, you gave it a 1. Okay, so for you, this is the bottom of the group. Tell us about the Chase.
I'm normally a big fan of a romp when it comes to Doctor Who, but there's something about the Chase that just rubs me up the wrong way. I don't know whether it's Terry Nation, and I sometimes think it is, because I do... By the time I got to Pertwee with my rewatch, I was very...
Yeah.
Oh, come on, Terry, write a new script. For God's sake. The best thing in the Chase is Barbara and Ian's departure. Not because they're going, but because of the way it's done.
No, it is glorious, yeah.
But the rest of it, I mean, I don't even mind the Frankenstein Dracula stuff. I think that's quite funny. But the Dalek that can't give its instructions out properly because it's a bit stupid. The sand bit Terry Nation's let the planet's dry. Let's call it dry. Well, they call it Aridius, but they may as well call it Dry World. All those little things just rub me up the wrong. And I know a lot of people really love the Chase, but for some reason it just rubs me up the wrong way. And I don't know. And the last time I watched it, I found it really tedious.
Oh, fair enough.
Fair enough. Okay, so we've got 5 minutes. So I'm going to briefly talk about the Romans. I mean, we can talk about it a lot more in the knockout rounds because it's top the group. The Romans might be my favourite Hartnell story. It's definitely in the top 5 or 3, but it's one of my favourite Hartnell stories ever. Because there's an aspect of it that resonates for me really importantly, which I have been meaning to do a video podcast about for literally years, and I keep writing little bits of it in my head, and never putting it all together. And I don't know. I'm not going to talk about that aspect of it now, but then we might talk about that next time. But in general, it pitches the horror of the Roman times against a comedic storyline brilliantly. I think the first Doctor being mistaken for Maximus Petullian and doing the whole playing the liar thing, it's just brilliant. All the characters get something to do. They all get their own subplot. And as I say, there's a level on which it resonates for me, which I'm not going to talk about now, which I just think it's a very special story. Tony clearly agrees with me because he gave it 4 points. Why do you not like it? Why do you not like it, Michael?
It's historical. I don't like Nero. It's just a bit. I don't know. You know what? I just don't know. It's an emotional thing. It's one of those reactions where you can examine it and you can pick it apart and you can try and work out why you feel a certain way, or you can save yourself a lot of time and just have the emotion. Which is all I've kind of done with it. It's like, yeah, it's got some nice bits, really genuinely beautiful bits. The Ian and Barbara stuff's gorgeous. I don't like the Doctor with the lyre, but you've got the impish stuff that we were talking about earlier that was missing from Herndel's performance in spades. It's some lovely performances. They actually look rested and relaxed, like they'd been living in the villa for ages. That's nice. The business with the Ian and Barbara's flipping hair, it's just, you're right, it's got some great stuff, but as a whole it just leaves me a bit dry. I know you're not meant to like Nero ever, but I don't like Nero. That's it. And also I miss the aliens. I kind of sit there going, oh, it's a bit more history, thanks. There's any monsters coming. And the monsters are us. I get it. We are awful. And you're right. It's the horror of the Roman life and all that business. But it just doesn't really push my buttons. So that's it, really, for me.
Okay, a final word to Tony before we wrap up for this part. So the Romans, go.
I think it's very funny and very dark at the same time. And it just about manages to hold together that balance. 2, it's Barbara and Ian's best story, I think. And if you didn't think they were an item before this story, they are definitely an item at the beginning of this story.
Oh, without question, you are so right.
And I think also Hartley is so clearly having a brilliant time because he's been given. He gets to be funny and violent and do stuff he hasn't done a lot in previous stories. And occasionally I think people, the one thing we talked about, because we haven't had the time, and I don't want to go on too long, we can talk about it in the knockout stage, is how people see Hartnell's performance through inherited fan wisdom versus what it's like when you actually watch it. Yeah. And how good he is, how good an actor he is, and all the Billy Fluss and all that kind of stuff that comes up a lot. It's a tiny part of the overall performance. But as I say, we can talk about that in more detail when we get to the knockout stages.
Cool.
No, you are completely right. I might even go away and watch it now.
Cool. Right. So on that note, we've had to sort of rush a bit. We can talk about a lot more of these stories in greater depth when we convene again. We may even be able to bring on our fourth person for the knockout phase if they are available next time we record.
Here's the thing. If that fourth person does turn up, the figures may change. So we might need to re-examine who exactly goes through. Some of my decisions might actually be justified.
Yes, so if that fourth person does come along, we will have to allow their scores into the group stages, and we'll have to reevaluate some of those as well when we reconvene. But for now, thank you very much, guys. It's been great to convene this little roundtable. I look forward to discussing more when we meet again.
Excellent.
But until then, it's goodbye from me.
Goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.
Good night.
Ta-ta.
Bye.
Be seeing you. Bye.